When I was a boy, my grandfather owned a small wooden radio. It sat right there on the kitchen table, next to a jar of loose nails and the smell of pine. That radio hardly worked. It hissed, it cracked, and sometimes it just went silent for hours. Every evening after supper, we'd sit side by side and try to fix it. He'd hand me a screwdriver, and I'd hold my breath as he turned a dial. The static would hum for a moment, then fade again. We never really repaired it, but we kept trying. For years, I thought we were fixing the radio. Only much later did I realize the radio was fixing us. My grandfather wasn't a man of many words. He spoke through gestures, a hand on my shoulder, a nod across the field, a quiet whistle while he worked. At the time, I thought his silence meant distance. Now I know it meant presence. You see, we live in a world that fears silence. We rush to fill it with noise, advice, endless explanations. But love, real love, doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just stays. That's what I learned sitting beside him. He never told me he loved me, but every evening when he pulled that old radio closer to the lamp, I heard it, not in words, but in the space between them. If you listen carefully enough, silence has a sound. It sounds like trust. Over the years, I've met many people who struggle to express love. They think they're bad at emotions because they don't know what to say. But love isn't a language of sentences. It's a language of attention. A look that lingers a second longer than usual. A cup of coffee placed quietly beside you. Someone waiting with you in the rain, saying nothing, but not leaving either. When my grandfather passed away, we found that same old radio in a box of his tools. The dial was missing. The wires still frayed. Taped to the back was a note, written in his shaky handwriting. Didn't fix it. Didn't need to. That one line said everything words never could. Since then, I have started noticing how often love hides in silence. A mother folding her son's shirt, smoothing the collar. A friend staying up late to make sure you get home safe. A partner who doesn't argue, but simply reaches for your hand. We tend to look for love in declarations, but most of the time it lives in observation. One evening, after a lecture, a woman came up to me. She said, "My father never told me he loved me. He just fixed things, the faucet, the lights, the car." Then her eyes filled with tears. And I only realized after he died, that was how he said it. I nodded and said softly, "Then he said it every day." Love without words can be confusing, especially in a culture that celebrates the loudest voice. But when you start to pay attention, you see it everywhere. The people who matter most rarely need to explain their care. They show it, patiently, quietly, repeatedly. A young musician once told me his grandfather came to every recital, never clapped the loudest, never gave advice, just sat in the back row smiling. Years later, at his first concert abroad, the young man said, "I still play toward that empty chair." That's the reach of silent love. It follows you long after the sound is gone. I sometimes think of love as a radio signal. You can't see it, but it fills the air. And when you tune in, even in silence, you find it still transmitting. But here's the secret. You can't hear it while you're talking. That's why our modern world struggles so much with connection. We equate love with constant communication, messages, updates, proof. Yet the people who make us feel safest are the ones who can sit beside us and say nothing at all. A friend once told me her happiest memory with her husband wasn't their wedding day or a trip abroad. It was one quiet evening on the porch. They said nothing for an hour, just listened to crickets and distant thunder. She said, it felt like the world finally stopped needing us to explain ourselves. That's love too, the comfort of shared quiet. My grandfather used to hum while he worked, not songs, just small tunes without words. One day I asked, "What are you humming?" He smiled and said, "Whatever fits the silence." I didn't understand it then, but now I do. That's what love does. It fills the silence with meaning, not with fear. There's a line I think about often. Attention is the purest form of generosity. When you give someone your full attention, you're giving them your time. And time, that's love's truest currency. That's why silence, when filled with presence, can speak louder than 1,000 reassurances. One day my niece came to visit, 12 years old, full of energy. I showed her that same old radio still sitting on the shelf. She turned the dial, heard the static, and frowned. "It doesn't work," she said. I smiled. "That's what your great-grandfather used to say." She looked puzzled. "Then why'd you keep it?" "Because," I told her, "it reminds me that love isn't always about fixing things. Sometimes it's about sitting beside them until they don't feel broken anymore. That's the kind of love the world forgets. Not the loud rescue, but the quiet company. The kind that doesn't demand, doesn't declare. It just is." I've seen that kind of love everywhere. In hospitals, in classrooms, in waiting rooms. A nurse adjusting a blanket instead of offering cliches. A teacher letting a student cry without asking for reasons. A friend showing up at your door with soup. No message, no speech, just presence. That's love in its purest form. Attention turned into tenderness. We often mistake silence for absence, but sometimes silence is devotion. Love staying humble, steady, invisible. So whenever someone tells me, "I wish they'd just say it," I tell them, maybe they already are, just in a different dialect. One made of gestures, pauses, and small daily rituals. The old radio still sits in my living room. Sometimes I turn it on just to hear the static. It reminds me of him, of us, and of every person who ever loved quietly. Because that's what silence sounds like when it's full of love. A steady, gentle hum that never really stops. A few years ago, I spoke at a small community center in Seattle. After the talk, a man in his 40s came up to me, holding his coffee like a shield. He said quietly, "My daughter doesn't talk to me much anymore. I keep asking what's wrong. She just shrugs. I don't know what to do." I asked him, "When's the last time you sat beside her without asking anything?" He blinked. "You mean just sit there?" I nodded. He laughed nervously. That would be awkward. A few weeks later, he wrote me an email. I tried it. We sat on the couch for 10 minutes, watching her dog chase its tail. We didn't say a word, but she leaned her head on my shoulder. I didn't realize silence could be that loud. That's when I started thinking of silence not as an absence, but as a kind of bridge. Words are like planks, useful, necessary. But silence is the space that holds the planks together. Without it, everything falls apart. And if you want to build that bridge in your own life, with your family, your friends, your partner, you can start small. Start with presence. Start with listening. Start with quiet attention that asks for nothing in return. Let me show you how. Practice 1. 5 minutes without a phone. This one is simple, painfully simple. Every day, choose one person. Then spend 5 uninterrupted minutes with them. No screens, no distractions, no multitasking. It might sound easy, but in our noisy, glowing world, it's one of the hardest gifts you can give. A woman once told me she tried this with her teenage son. She said, at first he looked suspicious. Then we started talking about his guitar. By the end, we were laughing about something stupid on TV. I didn't realize how much I'd missed his voice. The trick isn't to fill the 5 minutes with conversation. The trick is to let those minutes fill themselves. Let your presence do the talking. When you do, you'll notice something beautiful. People open up when they feel they don't have to perform. The next practice takes that same principle one step deeper. It's about doing, not saying. Practice 2. I'm here. Actions without words. Think of someone you care about who's been carrying a heavy load lately. Now ask yourself, what could I do to say I'm here without using words? It could be cooking a meal, filling their gas tank, leaving a note on their desk, fixing the leaky faucet they keep forgetting about. Small things. But each one whispers, you're not alone. When my neighbor's wife passed away, I didn't know what to say. Every sentence I rehearsed sounded too small for his grief. So instead, I showed up one morning and mowed his lawn. I never mentioned it, he never thanked me. But a week later, he left a jar of honey from his beehive on my porch with a note, you didn't talk, you just cared. Thank you. That's when I realized something. Sometimes the best words of love are the ones that never leave your mouth. And yet, even the quietest love deserves to be seen, at least a little. That's where the next practice comes in. Practice 3. The letter of silence. This isn't a long message. In fact, it should be no more than one honest sentence. Write to someone you love, or once loved, and say one thing you never found the words for. It could be as simple as, I still think of you when I smell coffee, or I hope you know you made me better. You don't have to send it. Sometimes writing it is enough, because love left unsaid doesn't disappear. It just waits for permission to breathe. A young woman once told me she wrote such a letter to her father, who had passed away years before. She said, I kept it short. Just one line. Thank you for teaching me how to fix things. I placed it in his old toolbox. Then she smiled and added, it felt like he heard it. That's what silence does when you give it form. It turns memory into dialogue. The next practice is one of my favorites because it shifts the focus from saying the right thing to simply staying. Practice 4. Silent support. The next time someone you love is hurting, resist the urge to fix it. Sit beside them instead. Most people don't need our solutions, they need our presence. You don't have to say, it'll be all right. You just have to say, through your being there, I won't leave. A man once told me about the night his best friend lost his job. I didn't know what to do, he said. So I brought over 2 beers, and we sat in the dark for an hour listening to the rain. He smiled. It was the only night my friend didn't cry. That's the medicine of quiet companionship. No advice, no explanations, just the calm weight of another human heart nearby. I've seen this same medicine work in hospitals, schools, even boardrooms. Silence, when it's rooted in compassion, heals faster than correction. It says, "You matter enough for me to pause my world." And then there's one final practice, the simplest yet most profound. It's the art of showing love through your eyes. Practice 5. The quiet gaze of gratitude. Every day, take a few seconds to look at someone with gratitude. Not analyzing, not comparing, just seeing. Look at your partner when they're not speaking. Look at your child when they're focused on something they love. Look at a friend when they laugh. And in that moment, silently thank them for existing. You don't need to say a word. Your eyes will say it for you. My grandfather used to do that. He'd look at me when I was busy trying to fix the radio, as if watching was more important than the result. Back then I thought he was just tired. Now I realize he was memorizing me. That's what love does. It studies without judgment. It remembers without needing to record. When you start practicing these 5 small acts, the minutes without distraction, the quiet gestures of care, the single-line letters, the silent support, and the gaze of gratitude, you'll begin to notice something extraordinary. People respond differently. They soften. They trust you more. They tell you more, not because you ask, but because you've earned the right to hear. One evening, not long ago, I met a woman on a flight. She told me she and her husband had been married for 40 years. I asked her the secret. She smiled and said, "We never stopped listening to each other breathe." I laughed, but she shook her head. "No, I mean it. Every night before bed we lie there for a minute, just listening. It's how we remind ourselves that love's still here." That moment stayed with me, because love in its truest form isn't noisy. It's steady, like breathing. So if you ever feel like you don't know how to express what you feel, stop worrying about the perfect phrase. Forget the rehearsed lines. Just be there. Let your quiet say what your words can't. In the next part of this story, I'll tell you how that same lesson came back to me years later, how a broken radio, a grown-up granddaughter, and a moment of silence changed everything I thought I knew about love. But for now, I'll leave you with this. When you stop filling the silence, you begin to hear what love has been whispering all along. Years later, I found myself in a hardware store with my granddaughter, Clara. She was grown now, 23, full of life, a mind that never stopped. We were there to buy a small screwdriver set. "Still fixing things, Grandpa?" she teased. I smiled. "Always." What I didn't tell her was that the radio, the same one we used to tinker with together when she was little, had stopped humming again. Not because it was broken, because time had made it too fragile to use. That evening after dinner, she followed me into the old workshop just like she used to. We sat down at the bench, dust floating through the lamp's glow. The radio sat there, quiet as a sleeping bird. She picked it up, turned the dial, and smiled. "It's still not working," I said softly. "Maybe that's the point." She laughed, the same laugh she had as a child. And for a long moment we didn't speak. We just sat there, the hum of the night outside filling the space between us. It was enough. That silence took me back to my own childhood, to those evenings with my grandfather, and I realized something simple and true. Every act of love we receive silently becomes a language we eventually learn to speak. He had passed it to me without saying a word, and now, without trying, I was passing it to her. That's how love survives time, not by echoing words, but by repeating gestures. The next morning, Clara found a note taped to the radio. It said, "Don't fix it, just listen to it." She texted me a picture with a heart emoji. That was all, and it was more than enough. I've come to believe that every generation struggles with the same challenge, learning how to love in a world that never stops talking. We measure affection by what's posted, said, displayed. But the truest love rarely shows up on screens. It shows up in presence. A few weeks later, I visited a friend in the hospital. He was a tough man, a builder, the kind who spoke more through action than through speech. He'd had surgery, couldn't move much, couldn't talk easily. I sat by his bed for an hour. We barely exchanged 10 words, but before I left, he reached out, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Thanks for not trying to make it better." That line became a kind of prayer for me, a reminder that sometimes love isn't the light we bring into the room. It's the shadow we choose to sit beside. Love, when stripped of performance, becomes pure presence. It's not about doing, it's about being. Consistently, quietly, kindly. It's the teacher who waits after class until the anxious student gathers their courage. The husband who doesn't interrupt when his wife needs to think out loud. The friend who listens to your same story for the third time as if it's the first. It's patience, practiced as tenderness. The world teaches us to equate love with noise. Say it louder, prove it faster. But the longer I live, the more I see that love grows best in quiet soil, the kind watered by time, not attention. I once read that plants grow most at night when the world is still. Maybe hearts do too. A few months after that evening in the workshop, Clara called me from the airport. She was moving to another city for a new job. I could hear the excitement in her voice, and the nerves too. "I'm scared, Grandpa," she said. I told her, "That's good. It means you're awake." Then she paused. "Can I take the radio?" I hesitated for a second, then smiled. It was always yours anyway. She sent me a photo a week later, the radio sitting on her new apartment shelf next to a cup of tea and a small plant. Underneath, she'd written, "Still not working, still perfect." That message made me laugh out loud and cry a little too. Because that's what every generation hopes for. Not that our children will repeat our words, but that they'll understand our silences. There's a peace that comes when you stop needing to be heard to feel loved. And an even greater one when you stop needing to speak to give love. When you begin to live that way, relationships start to soften, arguments shorten. You start noticing the things you used to overlook, the way someone adjusts their seat so you're more comfortable, or leaves the porch light on when you're late. Those are the love notes written in the margins of daily life. You might be listening to this now and thinking about someone you've struggled to reach. Maybe every conversation turns into misunderstanding. Maybe they're distant, or quiet, or tired. Here's what I'd suggest. Stop trying to say it right. Start showing it quietly. Sit near them without the need to fix. Share a task. Let silence be your ally, not your enemy. That's where real connection begins. I've learned that the people who love best are the ones who are most comfortable with pauses. They trust the space between words. They understand that meaning lives there, in the inhale before the reply, the glance before the smile. That space is sacred. A while ago, a young couple I counseled told me that they were considering separating. They said, "We don't talk anymore." I asked them to do one thing: eat dinner together every night for a week. No conversation required. Just sit, eat, breathe. The first few nights were awkward. Then, slowly, they began to smile. On the 7th night, he reached for her hand. Months later, they sent me a photo, the two of them cooking together, laughing. The caption read, "We're still quiet, but we're okay." Silence didn't save their marriage. Presence did. When you start listening for love in quiet places, you realize it's everywhere. It's in the nurse who adjusts your pillow, the friend who waits at the curb till you drive away, the barista who remembers your order. It's in the people who don't announce their care. They just live it. And one day, you realize you want to be that person too. Love spoken gently changes people. Love lived quietly changes the world. Sometimes I sit by the window with that old radio beside me. I still turn the dial once in a while, knowing nothing will happen. But every time, I swear I hear something faint. Not a station, not a song, but the memory of two people sitting side by side, fixing nothing and everything all at once. That's how I measure love now, by how much peace it leaves in its wake. So before you end this day, try this. Turn off the noise. Sit beside someone you love, or think of them, in silence. Watch their face, not your screen. Do one small act that says, "I see you," without words. Write one line of gratitude you've never spoken. Let your silence speak longer than your speech. Do these not as rules, but as reminders, because love doesn't need many instructions. It only needs time and attention. If you practice this kind of quiet long enough, something extraordinary happens. The people around you begin to feel safer. They start breathing easier, and you realize that's all love ever wanted to be, a place where another person can rest. When I think of my grandfather now, I don't remember our words. I remember the sound of his hands moving through a drawer, the smell of oil and dust, the soft hum of the radio that never quite tuned in. That sound, that silence, it became my inheritance. And maybe if you listen closely enough tonight, you'll hear yours too. Love doesn't always need to be said. It just needs to be lived. And when you live it, quietly, steadily, sincerely, the world becomes a little softer, the days a little slower, and every silence a little more sacred. So tonight, turn down the noise. Sit close to someone, a friend, a child, a partner. Don't search for words, just be there. And in that stillness, remember, that's what love sounds like when it's finally understood.